Hello everyone! Today we're going to be taking a look at Cuphead, one of the highlights from the jam-packed year of 2017. In this critique I'm going to be steering clear of all the controversy or fake controversy surrounding the game. If you'd like to know more about all that, Sean did a great video digging into the fake outrage of Cuphead, link in the description. Instead, I will be focusing on the gameplay. Because this is a boss rush, I'll specifically be looking at all of the bosses in depth, analyzing the gameplay mechanics as a whole, as well as giving my opinions on the experience overall. I want to make something clear. This is a game that is touted to be ridiculously hard, and anyone who doesn't like it must not be good enough. I think that's a ridiculous mindset to have first off, but I think this mindset has tricked some players into blindly defending it in every situation and context. I obviously have finished the game, I don't think it's too difficult or anything, but I do think some areas of the game could have been handled better, and will be pointing out when I don't think certain attacks or bosses in general are fair when we get to them. The game is split up into 3 aisles, which contain 3 types of game modes: bosses, run and gun levels, and the mausoleum levels that give Cuphead a new power-up after he can keep ghosts away from a vase. I'm first going to discuss the basic mechanics in the tutorial section, then the overall grading system the game has. Following that, we'll get started with the bosses of Aisle 1, then talk about the mausoleum areas and the weapons you can use in the game, move on to the bosses of Aisle 2, then discuss the run and gun sections, and finally finish it up with the bosses of Aisle 3 and the ending. Getting started, the game begins with Cuphead and his brother Mugman playing dice with the devil and losing, being forced to get all the devil's other debtors to pay up their souls if Cuphead and Mugman want to continue keeping their own. After this, we are shown the tutorial. Plenty of praise has already been shown to this section, but I would be remiss if I didn't join in. This skippable area that introduces us to all the basic mechanics of the game is nearly flawless. The minimalist art is a huge plus, as literally every other area in the game will be bombastic and brightly colored, so it's a nice contrast. The tutorial area serves its purpose without lingering too long or holding the player's hand. There's always simple mode if the player isn't adjusted quite yet. Since we're here, I'll give an overview of the basic mechanics of the game. You can move side to side, jump, shoot in 8 directions, dash forward, parry pink objects or attacks which increase your super meter at the bottom, and lastly, use your super that you built up throughout the level for extra damage. My first complaint of the game is how you are only allowed to aim in 8 directions. I've never liked this restriction in nearly any video game I've played. It doesn't make any sense to me why the character can't learn to aim anywhere but those defined spots. My suspicion is that it's just a constant circle jerk to reference run and gun type games from the past. In those games, you were usually working with a D-pad, meaning you only had 4 inputs, 8 if you combine 2 at a time for diagonals. There was a reason for that limitation. If you're using a mouse and keyboard, I get it, but this game seems to be designed around a controller, with analog sticks, meaning it has 360 degrees of freedom at your disposal. There are countless times in this game where I just couldn't get the aim that I wanted, and had to potentially put myself in harm's way to get an enemy. I understand that positioning is very important, but in most cases the extra challenge wasn't worth the headache. Once you actually get playing, after you defeat a boss, you see what grade you received for your performance. All of the bosses have the same scoring system: how fast you complete them, how much health you have at the end, how many times you parried a pink object in the level, what difficulty you are on, and how many times you've used a super card. I don't love this system a whole lot, but it's not terrible. I suppose I am happy that the grades at the end give players an extra incentive to come back to the game and improve, but I think the bosses themselves should be fun enough for a player to want to keep coming back to it. If any game would benefit from a true boss rush, which pits the player against all the bosses in a row, it would be this one. With how much people go on about this game's difficulty, and how relatively easy it would be to design and include compared to creating and drawing all this out in the first place, I think it would fit right in. A challenge mode where all the bosses are in a row and you don't get to reset your health? There's definitely an audience for that kind of thing. Hopefully in the DLC. Going back to the grades, what about them I dislike specifically comes down to how much it weighs each category and the inclusion of parrying and the super attacks in general. I want you to think of what each report card category means in a boss fight. Time elapsed, finishing the fight faster. Health remaining, don't get hit. Parry, you parry something which fills up your super, which you can use to finish the fight faster, meaning less time for you to lose health. And super, which finishes the fight faster, meaning less time for you to lose health. Do you see the problem? Parrying is already beneficial to complete all of the other categories. It didn't need to be its own. The super helps out 2 of the categories as well. It's literally a higher damage dealing blow. Why would the player be rewarded in a category that makes the fight easier? If anything, there should be a punishment for using your super too much. If they removed the parry as a requirement, players who would want to get a better time would already be parrying everything in sight so they can get their super filled up to finish the fight faster. It just doesn't seem like much thought was given to the scoring system. With how often, or little, depending on the fight, pink objects show up for you to get your 3 parries, it's like they thought of the boss attacks first, then the 3 parry requirement, then had to go in and make a few more of the random objects in the level pink. The worst offenders are when there's a bunch of normal colored objects in a row, followed by a single pink one. Instead of trying to survive the onslaught of attacks, my thoughts go instead to the design decision to make that specific object pink. Why that one? It seems so arbitrary. I think the time and your ending health should be the only 2 factors in your grade. Both of those categories go hand in hand. Imagine if the report card only had time. You would be encouraged to rush to the end, sometimes taking damage if needed so you can go faster. Now how about if it only had ending health? You of course would go slower, making sure not to play risky at the chance of taking damage. Because both categories make the player behave in opposite ways, there's always a constant struggle about if you should play it safe or go for some extra damage or a parry. How fast you go in the fight is somehow the least weighted category, meaning you can take your time and play it safe while still getting an A+. The system kind of loses its value when speed is nearly a non-factor. Okay, now that we have the report card out of the way, let's get going on the main course. Starting off in Aisle 1, we have the Root Pack and Botanic Panic. All of the bosses have a theme that they work with, which make them all stand out in their own way. This one seems to be vegetables in a garden. You can even see the Acme grow plant food as a reason why they're so big. A very nice touch. He starts off as a potato that shoots mud projectiles at you, the last one being pink and extra wormy so you can parry it. This is a good test to see if beginning players are paying attention. The projectiles gradually go faster and faster, so keeping the same timing on your jumps won't work. Next up we have an onion that cries, which causes teardrops to fall for you to dodge. Get it? Onions make you cry? I like it. The pink teardrops are there for you to parry, but I don't think it gives enough time for you to reliably and safely do so. Lastly, we have the carrot, which spawns little carrots to fly in from the top of the screen, and he uses his third eye to shoot rings at you. This is most likely the first time a player will see multiple types of attacks happening at once, and they're all telegraphed well in advance and fair. I like that you can even see the carrots approaching from the background. The background itself looks fantastic. This is one benefit to watching me ramble about the game. You get to stare at the cool things in the background without the worry of dodging attacks. Here we have a birdhouse, maybe the one Wally Warbles uses later in the game, some sunflowers, a tire swing, and a nice overcast with clouds floating by. Overall, a great opening boss. In a vacuum, obviously very, very easy, but it's supposed to be, so it's fine. Next up, we have Ribbian Croaks and Clip Joint Calamity. 2 frogs in a nightclub of sorts. Compared to the Root Pack, these frogs put up quite a fight. First phase has the small one throwing punches, one is arbitrarily pink so you can parry it, and the tall one releases some fireflies that you can shoot down. The small one charges you that you need to jump over, then they surround the player and attempt to blow you into what looks like some kind of ball with rings on them. Not really sure what that is, but alright. This phase is good. I like that the tall frog has an attack that isn't direct damage. It also gives the impression that they are a team and working together. Last phase, they turn into a slot machine. They fling coins at you, and you need to parry the slot machine arm to continue, as shooting the machine with its mouth closed won't do any damage. The attack pattern you get is randomized. There are 3 variations, all discs of some sort. Green one requires you to jump on as they speed up. Yellow one has balls that pop out, so you need to jump under them. And the red one has fire shooting upwards or downwards, so you need to get in the right position to not get flamed. I only have 2 small issues with this fight. My main problem is the lack of pink things you can parry. Besides the opening punches, nothing else counts for the parry grade, even the slot machine handle. My other issue is how the last phase is randomized. Sometimes I got the same attack pattern twice in a row, which means if it's the really easy green one, the boss is done with not much of a challenge. Maybe don't allow 2 of the same attack patterns to be selected back to back. One thing I really like about this boss is how the background is dynamic and layered when it didn't really need to be. Notice the pillar closest to the screen. When you go to the left side of the screen, it blocks the left door behind it almost entirely, while when you go closer to the middle of the screen, you can see more of it. That really didn't need to be done, but it makes the venue you're fighting in feel more alive. Overall, a decent outing. I like the variety of attacks in Phase 3, I like that you need to parry the handle for it to start, and the background is lively and pleasant to look at. Following that dynamic duo, we have a big ball of slime. Goopy Legrand in Ruse of an Ooze. This might be contender for easiest boss in the game as well. First phase, he bounces around, eventually stopping to do a punch in the shape of a boxing glove. The punch's hitbox isn't the best, as you can see here he definitely hit me, but it didn't count it. He then has 3 pink question marks around his body, which are the only things to parry in the level. Second phase is very similar, but he's bigger. I like that you can just duck and the fist won't hit you this time. His final phase turns into a tombstone which slides around and eventually slams the ground, with you potentially in the way. The hitbox on this attack feels generous on his behalf. I think there maybe should have been an extra frame or 2 on his descent. It looks like I should be out of his pathway, but he slams down so quickly it somehow gets me. Maybe the smoke counts as well? I don't know. Overall, this is probably one of the worst and most boring bosses in the game. The background isn't interesting either. I would have thought a boxing ring would be more fitting for a guy who clearly has a set of boxing gloves and likes to punch. Maybe they thought it would be too similar to the frogs, but they could have made the frogs harder and bumped them into Aisle 2. This feels like a tutorial in the worst way, where it's not fun to play or interesting to look at. Next up we have Hildeberg in Threatenin' Zeppelin. That's a weird one to say. This will be the player's first airplane level, which is probably why she's a boss a lot of newcomers get stuck on. I'll have some stuff to say about airplane levels in general later on, but overall I don't mind them. Her first phase sees purple airplanes shooting 1 bullet at you, while green airplanes shoot 4 bullets at you. She laughs, and her ha can hit you. It seems like words can hurt you after all! Anyway, I like the attack, and I think it has enough of a telegraph before it appears on screen. Her tornado attack is well telegraphed and encourages use of the mini-plane dodge. Her big swing to the left of the screen is also well told in advance. She either turns into a bull, a pair of dancing twins, or an archer. There are 2 things in this fight that I don't like, and one of them is the mini turret the twins throw out. It's a ball that fires in a circle, but I couldn't figure out where it would be aiming initially or which way it would be going. I got hit by this attack quite a few times. She then turns into a crescent moon, which looks really cool, as the background shifts into darkness. She juts her head forward to attack, which is very easy to avoid. You have stars float up and down that come your way, and you have the spaceships that fire downwards with their beams. This is the other thing I don't like. I have no idea how to predict when they'll attack, so I was hit frequently by them as well. I would have figured the color distinction mattered, that the red ones attack at a certain place on the screen and the yellow ones attack in a different place. I'm pretty sure the color is superfluous, and they both just fire immediately when you're under them, but I'm not completely sure on that. Overall, I really like Hilda. Nearly all of her attacks are interesting and fair, and the 2 that aren't don't drag down the experience. I'm very glad her final phase has her all the way on the right side of the screen and has plenty of surface area to connect with using your guns. The clouds and moon are visually interesting, even if the background isn't that fun. Last but not least for Aisle 1, we have KG Carnation in Floral Fury, the sunflower dude. He has some good and some bad. First of all, look at his standing animation. Hard not to like. His first phase attacks have him spawning homing acorns, elongating his face either low or high, firing a Gatling gun of colored seeds that can hurt the player on their descent, and they grow into a smaller enemy you have to get rid of. He also throws a bunny boomerang or something at you. I don't quite know what that is, it's weird looking. There's quite a lot of attack patterns for a boss in Aisle 1. I suspect this to be one newcomers get stuck on as well. After you smack him up a bit, we proceed to his final phase. Here, the ground is plagued with his vines, meaning you need to stay on and jump back and forth between the 3 platforms. Unfortunately, if you left a flying seed enemy, they're still there too. He attacks with some kind of projectiles which can be pink for you to parry, and he shoots his vines up 2 of the platforms, meaning you need to jump to the safe one. I like the viney platform attack a lot, but not in combination with that flying seed enemy if it's still there. The small enemies that spawn from the seeds are my biggest gripe. Like I said before, the aiming is only in 8 directions, so you just flat out won't be able to always aim where you want. With how many of these tiny guys grow from his seeds, it clutters the screen in a very annoying way. Especially the flying one, as you can only hit him when he shoots at you. I think beyond that, everything in this fight is fun and fair. It sure seems like in the first aisle they really wanted to hit you with nature or something. With the sunflower and the vegetable bosses, their backgrounds, along with the background for the slime fight being a boring forest. I guess they're getting the less interesting stuff out of the way first, but some more inspiration would have been nice for a few of these. That's all of Aisle 1's bosses, so let's discuss the Mausoleum levels. I think they're all... Well, They're there. You parry a bunch of ghosts. If one gets to the vase, you fail. You unlock a super art afterwards. The super arts in the game are okay. You have the basic horizontal damage one, the one that makes you invincible for a short time, and some kind of ghost one or something. I don't really bother switching up my super art that much. The only thing I dislike about them is if you neglect to use your smaller super cards before you get all 5, when you press the super button it has to be the super art, with no way of getting the smaller attack out instead. The game gives you plenty of weapons and bonuses to play with, unfortunately. Once you unlock enough coins in the running gun levels, you can buy some new types of weapons or a small bonus to attach to Cuphead. The bonuses vary from giving extra health at the cost of dealing less damage, letting you be invincible during your dash, getting an insta-parry on your first parry attempt, and one that gives your parry a small hitbox. I generally stick with the invincible dash, but to be honest, I don't mess with the items that much. The weapons, besides your starting straight-line shooter, vary from a lob shot that deals medium damage, a homing shot that deals low damage, a charge that deals a high damage but requires more precision, a backwards type shooter that deals average damage, and a high damage low range triple shot. I think they went about the weapons the wrong way. After a while, when you talk to someone on aisle 3, they mention that you should try out different weapons for different bosses. Yeah, that's a pretty good tip, as it seems abundantly clear some bosses were built around different weapons. I think instead of making these weapons optional, they should have had bosses where Cuphead is forced to use that weapon. He could have walked in, grabbed the weapon that was in the level as part of the beginning cutscene, then began the fight. Then you could build engaging boss fights around the certainty that the player not only has the weapon, but is using it. The lob and backwards shots in particular I think could have made fights more interesting if forced to use them. This could have also let certain boss levels stand out even more, as now in addition to the theme, attack patterns, music, and background, you have a specific weapon to use. I have a hunch that the bee was built around the lob shot, and the dragon around the backwards shot anyway, so just go all out and restrict the player to only that weapon. If that sounds ridiculous to you, if you're asking why would you want the game to restrict the player so much, you haven't been paying attention. The game already restricts the player with the airplane levels. In those, you can't shoot anywhere but right in front of you, and you can't turn around. I understand that these are a take on the classic shoot-'em-up genre, but with how often they are used, the game seems to be making some sort of statement with these bosses. In these levels, you are out of your element more than any other part of the game. You aren't on land, which means you can't run, dash, aim, or jump. You also can't use any of your weapons you purchased, and your super is always the same attack as well. While some may dislike these fights for the restrictions it places on them, can you at least now see how much easier these bosses were to balance? The developers knew exactly what build the player would have, and thus could fine-tune it to be exactly as challenging as they wanted it to be. This is my main problem with the weapons in general. It seems like they wanted to add some that made the game easier, while some that made the game harder or riskier. The game already has a simple, regular, and expert mode. It didn't need extra difficulty settings built into the game. There's also no guarantee a player who really should be using the homing shot would have enough coins or wherewithal to buy it. If you don't like my idea of making certain levels restricted to certain weapons, how about this? Simple mode in general I think is handled very poorly. It strips an entire phase from every boss, meaning a lot of the best parts of them are gone. Why not, instead of reducing the number of unique attacks, you give the player more health and give them the homing shot as their main weapon? This way they can keep the fire button held down and only focus on the incoming dangers, instead of juggling both aiming and dodging. The reason why I suggest the homing shot is because it makes parts of the game specifically, and every boss in general, much easier, to the point where it felt like an entirely different experience. The dragon, queen bee, and pirate in particular feel night and day going from regular shooter to homing shot. I don't think Cuphead is the type of game that needs a variety of builds to choose from, and it's not just the weapons that are the issue. The invincible dash on Sally's stage play and the train nearly ruined some attack pattern gimmicks entirely. With 3 supers, 6 weapons, and 6 bonuses, keeping in mind you can hold 2 weapons at a time, there are technically 270 builds you could go with. The whole appeal of the game is tightly designed boss fights, so any one of those combinations could be what the player is going in with, meaning there's no possible way to balance all of them correctly to get the experience they were hoping for. Those 3 bosses I mentioned earlier stick out in my mind not for the fun and engaging experience, but for the constant slap in the face I received for refusing to use better weapons. With all my griping about the weapons out of the way, let's move on to another round of bosses. Starting off in aisle 2, we have Beppy the Clown and Carnival Kerfuffle. I like this boss a lot, but it is home to one very unfair attack. The opening phase where he's in the go-kart is really well done, specifically the visual cues of when he is about to charge. He inches forward and to the side, but when he charges you, it's a very noticeable tell. The ducks flying overhead are also a nice touch. However, I dislike the duck that has the light bulb because shooting it down and having it crash over Beppy seemingly doesn't do any extra damage. And of course, I dislike the pink duck since it's arbitrarily pink, only so you can parry the specific one for no reason. The balloon phase also has the arbitrary pink balloon, but overall this is a very good phase. I love how you can see the roller coaster in the background as a tell before it appears, and the lights flashing red and green look so pretty. This is one of my favorite backgrounds to look at in the game, those flashing lights being the highlight for me. I do think they're a slight missed opportunity, however. The roller coaster appears on screen the moment the lights begin flashing. I think the lights should flash 1 second before the coaster appears to give an extra warning. The tip of the roller coaster has a pink nose, so you can parry that as well. This is an example of a boss with so many opportunities to parry, it's unlikely a player won't get the 3 they need. This next phase has the part of the fight I find the least fair. When he rides his merry-go-round-esque horse, he has an attack that shoots out a whole bunch of horseshoes. This has one of the worst visual and audio cues of any attack in the game. I'll slow it down so you can see. The first horseshoe comes out of his mouth before he even starts the opening animation, and the sound of his attack happens afterwards as well. There's no telling when this attack will happen, which is awful on a level where you constantly have to be jumping over the coaster to stay alive. There were plenty of times I was in the necessary jump over the coaster only to be blasted by these horseshoes. Besides that though, this phase is very good. Something about him on that horse makes me happy. He looks like he's just having a blast. I'm kind of jealous. His final phase is okay. You shoot his middle while avoiding green penguin clown things and their baseballs. Getting them to throw them high so you can drop below is fun. I don't know why the coaster is in this phase as well, unchanged, but it's not that big of a deal. Overall, the difficulty of this boss is solid. A little unfair in one part, but great visuals, great animations, and good attack patterns. After Beppy, we come to Baroness von Bonbon in Sugarland Shimmy. The first 3 phases you get to fight her minions one at a time. I love that there are 5 potential minions it could be, meaning the fight will be different every time, but who you get for that 3rd phase is important. In the 3rd phase, the little jelly beans attack like they do in the 2nd phase, along with the Baroness shooting clouds at you. If you happen to get the one you're the worst at on the 3rd phase, it can be rough. I think the candy corn and gumball machines are both pretty easy, but fun nonetheless. Gumball machine slips and slides while gumballs fly from the sky. The candy corn and his little junior candy corns go in a set pattern along the screen for you to avoid. The jawbreaker can be challenging if you have the jelly bean and clouds coming at you, but he's a fun one to jump around besides that. The jawbreaker and candy corn are really similar, but the jawbreaker homes onto the player directly. The waffle is annoying only for his diagonal square that hits me seemingly every time. He's not that interesting, he just breaks apart in tiny squares. The cupcake is by far the hardest for me. I don't know what it is exactly, but I seem to get hit by this guy more than any other. He does a ground pound that shoots up frosting. Finally, we have the Baroness herself taking the reins of this cake house monster. The sound effect for when the cake turns evil is very creepy. I love it. In this phase, you have the heads that seem to track the player, the platform to utilize, the cake monster throwing up some kind of rolling candy at you, and the level turns into a treadmill that you need to keep running to the left of the screen for. When I played this boss a couple of years ago, I remember how difficult I thought the heads were, but once you realize they will always stop after moving a set distance, you can easily predict their path and not have as much challenge. I don't think overall this boss has enough to parry. I'm assuming the rolling candy at the end is parryable. We had a pink jelly bean that runs on the ground, and a pink cloud. I'm not saying it's not doable, but with how little it seemed to naturally fit in with how I handled the boss, I didn't bother. Overall, the difficulty can vary depending on who you get in that 3rd phase, but it's not too bad. If not for the conveyor belt part at the end, I would say this boss was underwhelming, but the cake monster and floating heads make up for it. A solid showing. Next up, we have Wally Warbles in Aviary Action. This is my least favorite airplane level in the game. Let's get to it. This first phase isn't great. I really dislike the eggs he pukes at you that break into 3 directions, and the pink bird is, again, not something I like. I was able to capture just how terrible the parrying can sometimes be in the game. Watch how my hand slappy animation seemingly connects with him when I parry, but it somehow misses and I take damage. One good thing I can say is the tiny birds wearing a nail on their back is pretty funny. Second phase, he sheds his feathers. I'm okay with this one. Simple pattern dodging isn't bad. He loses all his feathers, time for phase 3. We have a baby bird in a flying nest that has spiky eggs float all around him. This part isn't awful, but it's plagued by the fact I can't shoot left. Going to the right side of the screen to avoid him is annoying. Even worse since his gun can shoot backwards. Cuphead, why can't you learn that? Anyway, time for the final phase, the worst one by far. He's on his deathbed, which is a cool visual, but you can only shoot to the right of the screen in a straight shot. The total surface area where he can be hit is extremely tiny. Sometimes I ended up hitting the birds holding up his bed instead. And again, having to go all the way to the right of the screen to dodge his attacks is just cruel. Him spitting out his heart and some garbage is a nice touch, I suppose. With how many pink objects were present in this fight, this is one where there's just no way a player can't get a perfect parry score. There's an outrageous number of things in this fight that count for your 3 you need. The opening pink birds, which there are so many of, the shots from the baby bird's ray gun, which again happens so frequently, and in the final phase, the pink vitamin and the pink boot. I counted 14 things you can parry in one attempt. Overall, I really dislike this boss for the way it abuses the plane's restrictions and for that final phase in general. The visuals are good as per usual, but aside from the deathbed, seem less inspired than other bosses. Continuing with the airplane levels, next up we have Jimmy the Great in Pyramid Peril. What a complete shift in quality here. I may be a tad biased, as I do have him as a figurine on my desk, but this boss is amazing. His first phase, he opens up his treasure chest, which reveals either homing swords, bits of gems and other treasures, or golden nesting cats. After which, he turns the map into something very interesting. He doesn't attack you directly, but you need to find and shoot his face in the pillars to advance through to the next part. The glaive things flying around between the pillars being on a stick, combined with his overall cheekiness, makes me appreciate Jimmy so much more. He has a genuine personality. He's magic, right? Of course he's magic, he's a genie. He can make things fly if he wants to, but he decided to put these glaives on sticks like a prop. This is some Robin Williams genie level humor. This small segment might be one of my favorite parts in the entire game. He then moves to a sarcophagus where he attacks you with mummies and eyeball Saturns. His sarcophagus face when you beat this part is so adorable and also kinda sad. He then turns into a puppet version of Cuphead that shoots at you while his hat floats about, shooting projectile bullets all around. Lastly, we have a giant head that takes up the entire right-hand side of the screen. He shoots rings at you, has floating pyramids that go in a circular pattern, and one that fires beams in a predictable fashion. Gameplay-wise, this is tied for the best airplane boss in the game in my opinion. Someone in Aisle 3 has the other half of that award. Visually, this might be my favorite in the game. They do so many creative things here. The background is a gorgeous desert with pyramids and walls in the middle. His first phase, he and the treasure chest are on a flying carpet. The genie's shoes are magic lamps. When he shoots a skull at you, he winks. His smug face when he's showing you his treasure from that chest is cheeky as hell. The line that separates his pecs on his body shows up on the rotating cylinder under his face, as well as the lamp boots. And lastly, when the sarcophagus opens, you see the contents are seemingly outer space, or some other dimension entirely. The laugh that he continues to do throughout the fight is also great. With how many style variations and attack patterns he goes through, I have no problem fighting him over and over. I love this guy. Lastly, on Aisle 2, we have Grim Matchstick in Fiery Frolic. This might be my least favorite boss in the entire game. Okay, let's get this over with. Remember when I talked about the weapons in the game being unbalanced, or how the homing shot is by far the most OP thing in the game? Well, I'm stubborn and I wanted to beat him with the regular shooter. The main issues with the dragon fight are the platforms and him being behind you on the last 2 phases of the fight, and also most of his attack patterns. I like the background, I like some of his attack animations, like the fireballs, and the triple-headed dragon is cool, but it's all undone by everything I'm about to discuss. This is what I'm talking about when I say some people might defend this as the game being hard, get good scrub, and all that garbage. These clouds are seemingly random, and they don't follow a formula of keeping enough of them on screen at a time. I feel like when Cuphead is in the middle of the screen, directly in front of him, there should be at least 2 different levels of cloud to choose from that he can reach, followed by another set of 2 clouds. When there's a big gap between clouds, or there's only one option to go with, that means there will of course be scenarios where you don't have a decision. If you don't jump, you will be damaged, but the place you're forced to jump to is also unsafe. In his second phase, he has flames walk out of his mouth, and sometimes they'll jump at you. This again feels incredibly unfair. Not only is the dragon behind you, so you have to constantly be aiming backwards, meaning when you do stop to shoot at him, you're at the risk of running into him, but the flames that will jump at you don't have any signifying characteristics. I have stared at those flames an entire phase before, and none of them have any indication they will jump. Give them a different hue, give them a different walking pattern, anything. Yeah, there are some faces that won't jump, but the angry faces that do, 3 of them will go by and nothing, then out of nowhere one will jump at you. They don't jump at the same location on the tongue either. They can seemingly jump right after they exit his mouth, or wait until they're all the way at the end of the screen. And when they do jump, you will rarely be able to predict where they're going. I thought they would target where the player was when their audio cue kicks in, because, you know, that would be the fair thing to do. But it seems like they sometimes track the player, and sometimes they purposefully go too high or the wrong direction. Maybe it's also about which way you're facing when they jump. It's ridiculous how much thought I have to put in to reliably avoid damage in this fight. When on the bottom cloud, they hit you, but when you're on the second lowest cloud, even though their flames are clearly hitting you, you don't get hit. I hate this fight so much. The last thing I will say about this phase is with how low the dragon is on the left side of the screen when his tongue is out, I generally have to crouch to hit him. Well, when I want to jump out of the way on a moment's notice, guess what? I'm crouching, so that means I might fall through the cloud and take damage instantly. It's almost like there's so much less to worry about when you have the homing shot on. Like it should be on some easier difficulty or something? Phase 3 has the level turn into a stormy night, with the now 3-headed dragon behind you. I don't love the flamethrower attack in this phase either. This is a level where, because of the platforms, you have to be jumping all the time. If you happen to be on the lower platform because that's what was there, when the flamethrower attack happens, you either take damage from the flame when jumping, or by smacking into the dragon because you didn't jump. There's no decision to be made, you take damage. And finally, take a look at this spitting fire bubble attack. There is not nearly enough of a tell that this attack is about to happen. You have 3 heads swaying constantly, rain, clouds to look for, and they give you absolutely no warning for this attack. I can't take this anymore. Throw this boss fight in the dumpster. Alright, with the Isle 2 bosses completed, let's take a look at the run and gun levels. Strange. I don't have much written here. Oh, that's right, because the run and gun levels aren't that good and aren't worth as much time. I don't know why people voice their opinions so much to get levels like these in the game. I don't think they're fun at all, and I think their inclusion was the catalyst to include coins, which meant you had to have things to buy, which meant the weapons got brought in. The only 3 that stand out are the Funhouse Frazzle, Perilous Piers, and Rugged Ridge. The Funhouse one has the gimmick where you can go on the floor and the ceiling. It's fine, I guess, but a lot of the enemies in this level are just so annoying. The gravity flip you do by parrying the card is not handled well when it comes to your hurt box when transitioning. Sometimes I would clearly be in the car's hitbox and be fine, and sometimes I would be seemingly in the same place and get hit. I get annoyed just thinking about it. The pier one has a cool ending. You need to ride an octopus along the water, parrying his gem to make him shoot the rocks blocking your path. Rugged Ridge is probably the best one in the game, only for that last segment. I like platforming a lot, and even though it's pretty simple, a few of the landings are pretty precise, and Cuphead has great in-air control, so it felt great to play. The highest rank you can achieve on these levels is a P rank for Pacifist, meaning you didn't kill any enemies with your guns throughout the entire level. I find this inclusion to be very interesting. It could just be a new way to challenge the player, but I have different thoughts on it. I'll get to that at the end of the video. Continuing with the boss critique, we have Isle 3 and the ending left to do. Starting off, we have... oh great, the other worst boss in the game. Rumor Honeybottoms in Honeycomb Herald. I really want to say this is the worst boss in the game, I really do. But it's just so pretty. The background and color palette for this area just makes me smile. Be happy you're watching this boss and not playing it. Queen Bee suffers from the exact same problem as the dragon did, the platforms. Why aren't they consistent? If they had the same amount of platforms throughout the level, it would have been fine. Again, the homing shot on this level just makes it 1,000 times easier, especially on that last part. Okay, I'll actually get started. First phase is terrible. I know Baroness von Bonbon, the candy lady, had weaker minions attack you as well, but at least they were interesting. The security guard bee literally just walks back and forth throwing up a bee mine in the air, while a worker bee sadly flies across the screen. Just so boring. With how often I had to restart this fight, my eyes would glaze over and do the first phase on autopilot. Second phase has a really nice tell of where she'll pop her head out. I like this. It gives plenty of warning. Aside from that, I don't think any of her attacks are interesting or fun to avoid. The purple circles you can parry home onto you. The triangle she creates that shoots other smaller triangles is annoying since it always spawns right on top of you. And lastly, the bullet beam missiles go up the map in a side-to-side motion, which can be annoying depending on your platform layout. They also exist off-screen to hurt you, I guess. As you can see here, I take the damage even though the missile is above the screen. Her final phase, she transforms into a plane at the bottom of the screen, while you have to move upwards. Very similar to the dragon where he was on the left of the screen while you move to the right. This suffers a similar but even worse problem. Stopping to aim her is just such a pain. Easy as can be for the homing shot, but with the regular shooter it's just a nightmare. Aiming down and need to jump? Better be prepared to fall down the platform if you mess up. She launches fists at you for some reason. She has a buzzsaw attack. I really don't know about this boss. There's just not enough to make it interesting. It's a slog to get through and doesn't have enough interesting or unique attacks and phases. Maybe remove the first phase entirely. Make the platforms more consistent. Remove her last phase. Nope. Never mind. There's just no saving this one. She's so bad. I'm out. Moving on. Next up, we have Captain Brinybeard in Shootin' and Lootin'. Thankfully, this time we're on solid ground. This is another one I mentioned that is a lot less trouble with the homing shot. Because he's up so high, getting all your shots to count don't happen during tense dodging maneuvers with the regular shooter. This boss only has 2 phases, but plenty of attacks. The barrel hanging overhead constantly drops down when its face is angry. The captain himself uses a squid to shoot projectiles at you. He calls on his 3 helpers, the shark that juts in the left side of the screen, taking up almost all of the dock, the swimming doggos that slide across the dock from the right-hand side, and a squid that pops out to make your screen darker. This, the frog wind from earlier, and 2 other attacks we'll see coming up soon are the only attacks in the game to my knowledge that don't directly deal damage to the player. The helpers all have their own audio cue so you can tell who is spawning in, which is nice. The ship eventually starts shooting cannonballs at you, and this is the least fair thing in the fight. This level can't even be consistent with the rules it's established. The barrel only attacks when his face turns angry. When he's not a threat, his face is happy. There isn't a change in the ship's expression at all when he decides to join in the fight. When he's in the fight, it's fine, you know to watch out for it, but not having any visual or audio indication when he finally becomes a factor is just bad. Finally, in the last phase, the boat turns into a whale. He shoots a weird fireball and a gigantic purple laser beam, I guess. Did not expect that. Those 2 wouldn't be so bad if the barrel wasn't a factor. When you duck down to avoid the laser beam, if he's coming your way, there's nothing you can do. He's going to hit you. It's just gonna happen. The last phase is a pain with a regular shooter, but with the homing shot, just crouch and it's over in a few seconds. Ridiculous. Overall, I don't love this boss, but it's not terrible, not nearly to the extent the last 2 were. So yeah, it's alright. Werner Werman in Marine Corps is our next bout. Basically Tom and Jerry. I love this fight, but I barely remember it. It's just so easy and goes by so quickly. This probably should have been put in Aisle 1 or Aisle 2. I'm assuming they kept it in Aisle 3 because they were worried the pink boost pads would be a tough thing to do for starting off. I'm not sure. We begin the fight with the mouse in a can. He flings junk at you, then cherry bombs, pink boosters, then he charges at you. All good stuff, well telegraphed, and you can even see the cat's eye poking through the hole in the background, along with plenty of medals on his walls. Nice. Bottle caps then surround the screen, a platform appears, and he goes up top or down low to use his flamethrower. I like how much of a heads up you have when bottle caps and the flamethrower appear, but again it's very simple to avoid. Finally, the cat eats the mouse, wood pieces begin falling for you to avoid. He reaches his paw out to one side to attack you, and has some ghost mice launch pink balls at you. Once you defeat him, it turns out the mouse was piloting the cat the whole time, I guess. This fight really needed another phase or something. Way too short and easy. I think the reason this boss is such a breeze compared to others all comes down to how big his hurt box is. When he's in a can, the whole can counts for damage. When he's in his flamethrower phase, he's basically still the centerpiece of the screen and his whole body counts for damage. And the cat's entire body in the background counts for damage as well. I don't think MDHR took into account how big of an impact the size of the enemy's hurt box truly is. The sunflower can only be hit right in his sunflower bud. The pirate's boat doesn't count for damage against him. And remember the big bird from earlier during his deathbed phase? Surface area doesn't matter when you have the homing shot, but it matters significantly when you have your basic shooter. If while you jump and dodge, your shooter still damages the boss because the hurt box is so big, the fight will naturally be much quicker. Again, just another case of things not being balanced appropriately to what gun the player could be using. Our next bout is Cala Maria in High Seas Hijinks. Fantastic name. Airplane level, and it's a good one. In her first phase, she has a plethora of attacks she could dispense. She pukes out pirate ghosts that charge at the player, she grabs a specific colored fish that determines what attacks will come out. If it's yellow, it'll be an electric dolphin. If it's red, it shoots out red and pink projectiles. She spawns in 3 types of helpful critters down below. The turtle with his dukes up shoots a bomb that explodes into projectiles. When he fires it from his shell, he even plugs his ears. Amazing. We have the puffer fish that you can shoot, parry if they're pink, or just avoid. And lastly, we have a horse on a life raft that shoots a water spout upwards. I guess you could call him a seahorse. This attack doesn't damage the player, but it makes it harder to avoid other damaging attacks. When the eel grabs onto her, it's time for her next phase. The eel shoots projectiles, and Maria herself does a Medusa-like gaze that freezes you. I like that you can shoot down the eels to make this section a bit easier. I'm not confident that there's anything you can do to avoid the Medusa gaze, however. You could plan around not being able to move for a second, but I don't know. I wouldn't say this is outright unfair, but something about it doesn't feel perfect. Lastly, you enter a cave, chasing after her head that's floating on its own, spiky roadblocks and coral on the ceilings and floor you need to avoid, as well as the red skull bubble. She still does the Medusa gaze in here as well, and I'm pretty confident you can't avoid it here, which I think is less than fair, especially considering the complete lack of a tell that is about to happen. I would be okay if I had to position myself in a good place before I got frozen to not take damage, but it happened so suddenly there's just no time. Besides some issues with her freeze attack, I love this boss. There are so many interesting visuals to look at, plenty of different attack patterns, and 2 non-damaging attacks. It's fights like these that make me wonder why Queen Bee was so underwhelming. Next up, we have Sally stage play in Dramatic Fanatic. This is a good show, but I'm not sure if I got the proper experience, as I beat it first try. I like the setting a lot, the attacks being theater and prop related are all great, even the curtain is asbestos. First act, she's a bride in the wedding, I think. She throws fans on the ground, she does a diving kick, and has a parryable pink heart. The groom in the background is losing his mind. Second act, they move to the suburbs and have a baby, I think. The baby throws bottles out of the window. Sally spawns electronic mice that scurry along the ground for some reason. After that, you actually kill her, it looks like. She floats to heaven and becomes an angel, god thing. It's in this act you see that my invincible dash ruins the tidal wave attack gimmick entirely. You're supposed to keep the meteor on screen until the wave attack happens, then you break it open, using the pink star to parry and get height over the wave. I just dashed through it instead. Whoops. She also spawns lightning props to attack you. Finally, the last act is when the actors get to take their bow. She floats up top, pink roses get thrown in from the crowd, and an umbrella is what you need to avoid while shooting Sally up top. Like I said, I managed to beat her first try, but just watch how much I struggle to hit her in this last segment. Homing shot, blah blah blah, you've heard it 1,000 times now, I'll stop. Since there's not much to say about this fight, I will mention that there is an inconsistency on what counts as a parry for the report card. I parried that star every time, but that doesn't count apparently. It seems like mandatory parries don't count in any of the fights. Okay, I guess, but that means the report card is technically incorrect. Our next boss is the last airplane fight in the game, Dr. Call's robot in Junkyard Jive. This is my other favorite airplane level, kind of like a mix between Iron Giant and Dr. Frankenstein. At the start of the fight, you can attack his antenna, his chest cavity, or his lower abdomen garage door. Each of them offer a different attack pattern. The antenna shoots a laser, the chest launches a parryable robot thing, and the garage door spews out flying robot ships. What makes this phase engaging is that depending on which of the 3 elements of the fight you destroy first, a new enemy or attack pattern will take its place. There are lots of ways this fight can go. After the chest cavity is destroyed, some robot arms come in from the left side of the screen. After the antenna is destroyed, he shoots out nuts and bolts. After his garage door is destroyed, a skull bomber comes out. When detonated, emits a huge blue radius of damage. It's very cool looking. After all 3 of those points are destroyed, his heart comes out and you deal damage to that. Next we have a slightly annoying ordeal as we have to get in front of this flying head while being harassed by the skull bombers. I don't mind this phase that much, but it is frustrating that the only reason it's a little bit difficult is it abuses your airplane restrictions. Final phase, the Doctor himself is in the robot's head, Bowser Jr. style. We have some roadblocks that prop up on the bottom and top of the screen, and the Doctor shows off his shiny diamonds to you, which give off some kind of electric projectile. I'm not really sure what the difference is between the red and white diamonds. Overall, I really like this fight. Everything seems fair, the visuals and background are interesting, and the opening phase feels more dynamic than most. Lastly, on Aisle 3, we have one of my favorite bosses in the game, Phantom Express and Railroad Wrath. The gimmick of this fight is you need to keep your railcar in good positioning by parrying either the left or right handle. While you do this, pumpkins fly overhead, dropping pink bricks to try to move the railcar and screw you up. He has 4 distinct phases. First, we have a ghostly guy throwing eyeballs at you, just eyeballs and the pumpkins overhead so far. Next phase, we have a skeleton head and arms that switch places in all 3 train cars. You ideally want to keep your railcar so it's underneath his head, but if you can't manage in time but jump when the hands come down, you also avoid damage. Next phase, it looks like phantom pistons? Forgive me if that's wrong, I really don't know what those are. They surround Cuphead, taking turns shooting lightning over 2/3 of the screen. Ideally, you would like to be on the opposite end of the one who is shooting lightning, but here the invincible dash kind of breaks that attack pattern. While this is going on, ghostly skulls shoot up out of the middle train car and slowly fall back down, tracking Cuphead. When you shoot them down, they turn into a pink object, which is actually bad because they too can move the rail car. Finally, after this phase, once you defeat both pistons, we get the head train car as our final opponent. He's invincible until you open his chest cavity. We need to parry his pink tail so his heart shows so we can attack it. I love this gimmick so much. I really don't know why they didn't lean into this sort of thing more often. While this happens, he shoots a bone circle projectile at the player, and when the chest cavity is opened, flames flicker out of the engine. This boss took me about the same amount of time as the Bee and the Dragon did, but I was never frustrated, because everything in this fight is fair, and the fight itself was novel and interesting. I'd be curious to know if anyone who completed the game got frustrated with this boss. Maybe if you're bored by ghostly Halloween-themed things, or maybe you get annoyed by having to babysit the turn handles in the railcar. I was okay with both though. I think this is a near flawless fight. Since we have all of the regular bosses completed, before we enter Inkwell Hell for the final 2 fights, I want to at least acknowledge that the visual and sound designs are both really good. I know it took a ton of work to get this to look like a genuine 1930s cartoon, and I think it paid off tremendously. Nothing else looks like it. Nothing. The music fits well with the theme. I like listening to it while playing, but I can't say it's anything I would listen to at home or in the car or anything. I don't have anything interesting or new to say about both the music or visuals, but there you go. On to the last 2, well, last 11 bosses. Before we can fight the devil, we have to get through King Dice. This is a unique encounter. We have to roll a die to determine how far on his gambling board we get. You have 9 numbered spaces that all house unique casino-themed mini-boss fights, a few free spots with no fights, and a start-over space which takes you all the way back to the start. You need to get to the spot that says Finn and fight King Dice in 1 life. You can thankfully pretty reliably get the die roll you want, 1 to 3. Picking the spots that grant extra hearts is usually a smart move, or picking the spaces with the bosses you know are the easiest for you. All 9 numbered spaces are consistent with 1 boss, so it's never a surprise who you'll get. So basically we have 10 more fights to go through before the final boss. Number 1, we have alcohol in different types of glasses. They all have their own attack. I think the horizontal pouring attack mixed with the vertical spilling attack is a bit cheap, but overall nothing too bad. Number 2, we have poker chips that do the same attack the whole fight. They, in random assortments, go back and forth on the screen, and only the top chips can be damaged. Easy, but good. Except the foreground on the left sometimes blocks the bottom chip, so you can't tell if it's moved until it's too late. Number 3, we have the cigar that shoots fireballs that go in a round pattern. He teleports to either ashtray with cigarettes flying upwards in the middle. Good fight, I like this one. Number 4, we have the domino. This one is also really good. There's a conveyor belt that you need to stay on while jumping over the spiky areas. The domino shoots either gems at you or releases some sort of tiny bird domino that flies in a predictable pattern. I bit my tongue. Number 5 is my favorite, the rabbit in a hat that does 2 magic trick attacks. Skulls that surround the player and you need to find the way out. The second attack, he has playing card symbols below or above the player that you need to parry the pink one to not get hit. Number 6 is a skeleton horse buggy thing, an airplane fight on a ghostly racetrack. I don't like the foreground in this fight, it's very hard to see what's going on, it feels like artificial difficulty. One thing that's fantastic about this fight is the ghost rider that jumps up from the track below is visually distinct and always the same. This is something that was missing in the dragon fight with the tiny flames that went across his tongue. See, it's not so hard to play fair. Number 7 is the roulette wheel. Her gimmick is you need to parry the poker chips to jump over her dancing attack. She pauses at the end of the screen after a while, and the poker chip you've been standing on will reset, usually leading to you panicking and taking damage. Not cool. This is also a fight where the invincible dash ruins the gimmick as well. Number 8 is by far the easiest, and it's not even close. You shoot an 8-ball, he shoots a weirdly colored projectile at you, while billiard chalk bounces around the screen. Always pick this one. Easiest fight in the game. Number 7 is a claw game monkey that has you matching pairs of cards to awaken and damage him. Very interesting, but it suffers from you being on the right side of the screen a lot to avoid him, meaning no chance of dealing damage since you're in a plane. And finally, we have King Dice himself. His only move is his card stampede. You have to stay above the cards by parrying the pink ones as they go across the screen. This was the only fight I conceded and used the homing shot on. I personally don't like using the die to roll which boss I'm going to get, so I just kept spamming parry while he rolled because I was getting annoyed. I can't say I'm proud of the A+ it gave me, especially since my time was terrible, but what can you do? I like this fight for its novel approach on a mini boss rush of sorts. In a way, I'm happy how long it can take. A good gauntlet near the end of the game can be cathartic. After this, we get to confront the devil himself. He offers us a deal to join him or fight him. I don't really see how the game benefits from this option, especially since you've had to fight all of his debtors without even a conversation with them. I would have thought Cuphead, a dude who seemingly has never been in a fight in his life, would try to talk to some of them, which would have led to a fight. The one fight of the game that is justified is the one you can duck out of. Very strange. Of course we say no, so we can experience one of the better end bosses out there. I really like this fight. He has his minions run in from the left and right sides of the screen, and you can see them come out behind his chair, so it's telegraphed just fine. He has a clap attack where his head turns into a goat. Very nice. He launches some fireballs that come at you one by one of them being pink, of course. He has 4 bouncy balls, 1 pink, that bounce around. His head turns into a spider beast with 6 eyes that jumps around to get you. And lastly, he turns into a dragon serpent that slithers in from one side of the screen. This is the only thing I think is unfair about this fight. Sometimes the RNG will be out to get you, and you will have to go all the way to the left side of the screen just as his minion is approaching from that side, and you can't see what's going on because the foreground is blocking you, so you don't know when to jump, dodge, or shoot. Not great. Once you smack him up a bit, he sheds his skin, opens, and jumps down a hole. Cuphead follows, and on to Phase 2. Here we have his giant head and 5 platforms. His hurt boxes are his eyeballs in this section. He flings an axe that travels in a circular pattern, and he digs a pink bomb for you to parry out of his ear. As this is happening, flaming poker chips sometimes fall from the sky on specific platforms. I think this second phase might be the one in the game I have the most fun playing. An example of a time I felt getting to specific positions to aim at his hurt box was enjoyable. After this, the platforms reduce to 3. He has 2 purple demons shoot skulls back and forth. Poker chips continue to fall, and some little imps try to attack the player as well. Final phase is down to 1 platform. The devil begins crying, poker chips continue to fall, and his tears do damage as well. I love this phase as well because you know you're so close to the end, and jumping off the platform to avoid the chip and back on again feels great. Besides the one issue I have with the opening phase, this fight is basically flawless. I'm really happy MDHR ended on a very strong note. It would have felt pretty lame to end the game with something as cheap as the Queen Bee or something. Lots of good attacks, lots of interesting animations, and a good struggle is told with the devil's demeanor as the fight progresses. With the devil defeated, you unlock Expert Mode. I'm kind of split on Expert Mode. I like the idea of making the game harder for more challenge, but the way they went about it is kind of boring. It feels like the attacks and projectiles move faster, and the boss maybe has more health. I don't know, it was kind of hard to tell when I tried it with the devil. While I suppose I am glad there aren't any unique attack animations exclusive to Expert Mode, it just seems like a missed opportunity to not have something more. I really think a proper boss rush mode would be an easy fix for that though. It's weird how the game known for being about tough bosses neglects to include it. With some of the issues I mentioned in specific fights, making their projectiles faster wouldn't make the fight harder in a good way. I'm not really blaming MDHR for this one. Harder difficulties are tough to get right. Because you can't introduce harder enemies in earlier locations like some games can, there's not much to work with outside of more health for the boss or faster attacks. At least S rank requires you to avoid all damage. At that point though, I would prefer Expert Mode just leave you with 1 health from the get-go. Before I wrap up the video, I have one last talking point. I want you to think of what makes Cuphead a fun game. What about it? What is the precise reason the bosses are fun to fight? If a boss is too easy, it can be boring, correct? Why is that? There are plenty of games where even fighting easy opponents can be enjoyable. Imagine a boss in Cuphead that didn't move much that you could basically just fire away at them. Would that be fun? No, it wouldn't. The fun in this game comes from staying alive while dodging oncoming attacks. The defense part of the game is what's fun. The offense part of the game is not fun. This may have been something HDMR knew as well, since the highest ranking on the running gun levels is a pacifist completion, meaning no offense was performed. Your starting shooter, especially when compared to other 2D shooting games, feels pathetic and limp. When any of your guns connect with the proper hurtbox, the boss flashes briefly to signify you hit them, but that's about it. Your offense is put on the back burner for visuals and audio. There are no interesting ways to approach a boss fight besides changing what your shooter's range is and its damage value. You can hold 2 weapons at a time, but none of them pair together in interesting ways. I really don't know why the restriction of 2 weapons at a time exists, as all it does is make you quit out when you think you might have to try a different weapon. When you pick the weapon that you think might be decent for the fight, the bosses don't do anything when hit. Not only do you basically hold down the attack button the entire fight, in almost all of them the boss barely moves, so there's not really much variance. They may as well be a wall with a target on it. In each new phase and nearly all of the boss fights, the attack patterns change, the enemies may get bigger or smaller or slightly change position, but only a few of them actually make you engage with them in a different way. The frogs on their last phase can't be hit unless you parry the arm of the slot machine. The train on its last phase can't be hit until you parry his tail to open up his heart cavity to shoot. The robot, you need to keep attacking one of a few weak points that alter the fight differently depending on which you take out first. Those 3 fights felt the most dynamic to me. It didn't feel like I was just dodging and also holding down the attack button. I was dodging and had to think about how to attack them. I wonder what the game would look like if every fight had something like this. I also wonder how the game would look if you stripped it of all of its shooting elements. Instead, only after you dodge enough attacks, you get to smack them when they're fatigued and continue to the next phase. The mouse and cat boss specifically would have been better if that were the case, since it's so easy to constantly keep shooting them that the fight ends way too soon. I don't feel like a better player because I hit them more often, especially when it's so much easier to hit every boss more often with the brain-dead homing shot. The inclusion of that weapon alone is what made me wonder what the point of aiming at and attacking the bosses actually is. The only thing the game gains by having you attack the bosses throughout the fight is proper positioning. There are some fights where it's kind of fun to get in the right position to hit them, like the devil fight, but the dragon, bee, and giant bird are examples of it not making the fight more interesting, just more annoying. So there you have it folks, Cuphead in a nutshell. There's obviously a lot to love here, it's one of my favorite games. It also has plenty of things that don't mesh well with the core gameplay or are just unfair or annoying. I think if you stripped out the weapon choices, 3 of the bosses, the running gun levels, and the overworld entirely, you'd have something extremely tight and easy to come back to. As it is now, it's still a fun game to experience again, but maybe only playing the bosses that you like while sticking to a weapon that makes the game slightly challenging. The DLC hasn't come out yet, so there's still more Cuphead to come. I have confidence we'll see a few very good boss fights and hopefully some kind of boss rush mode. Even though I'll never be able to finish it, it would be worth a few hours of trying. Hopefully someone out there gained something by watching this video. Even if you didn't, I appreciate you sticking around to enjoy the show. Thanks for watching, everyone.